The courtroom was cold, its sterile white walls reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. Rebecca Matthews sat in the defendant's chair, her fingers clenching the edges of the table as she tried to hold herself together. Her husband, Adam, sat just a few feet away, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his lips. Around him, her family, her parents, her brother, sat with their eyes fixed on her, expressions a mix of judgment and indifference. She could feel their eyes drilling into her, accusing her of things she hadn't even done. The words from Adam's lawyer: reckless financial behavior, questionable investments, and irresponsible management, felt like poison in her veins. But the worst part? They didn't even know the half of it. The secret she'd been keeping. The inheritance that would change everything. The $60 billion gold mining empire she never knew she had. Rebecca shifted slightly, trying not to let her trembling hands show. The weight of her blazer, slightly too big for her, felt heavier now, as if it were an armor she'd been forced into but never asked for. The gold watch on her wrist, a gift from her late grandmother, the only person in her family who had ever believed in her, now felt like a mockery, a reminder of everything she had lost and the truth that had been buried for years. Adam was speaking, his words laced with false concern, as though he genuinely cared about her financial ruin. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth, "my wife has mismanaged the family finances for years. The company she claims to have been managing has been in chaos for months, leaving us vulnerable. She's hidden her debts, led us into these catastrophic investments. This bankruptcy is necessary, not just for her sake, but for all of us. I had no choice but to take these actions." The sound of his voice made Rebecca's stomach churn. She knew he was lying, but there was no way to prove it yet. No one knew about the letter that had arrived 3 weeks ago, the one that had changed everything. No one knew about the inheritance that was about to turn her life upside down. Adam had meticulously woven his web of manipulation, isolating her from her family, controlling every aspect of their relationship. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rebecca wasn't the same woman who had fallen for his charms years ago. She had learned, painfully, the depth of his betrayal, the affair, the gaslighting, the emotional abuse. And now this bankruptcy petition? This was just another calculated move to strip her of any power, to leave her with nothing. Rebecca's thoughts shifted back to the letter, the one from Whitmore, Sterling and Associates, one of the oldest estate planning firms in the country. It had come just a few weeks after Adam's affair was exposed. It had been a cold Tuesday morning when it arrived. The thick envelope, embossed with the firm's gold logo, had sat on the kitchen counter for hours before she finally opened it. She had no idea who Theodore Ashford was. He was a name mentioned only in passing, a distant relative from her mother's side, someone who had severed ties with the family years ago. But this letter, it changed everything. Her grandfather had been watching her. He had followed her career, her struggles in real estate management, her fight to make a name for herself in an industry dominated by men. He had watched, and apparently he had believed in her. The letter had told her of a legacy, a $60 billion gold mining empire, Ashford Mining, a company that spanned multiple continents, controlling massive reserves of gold from the United States to South America. And it was all hers now. But she couldn't let anyone know. Not yet. Not until she had the proof. The judge's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his tone neutral but with a hint of concern, "this petition claims that you've been irresponsible with your financial dealings, that you put your family and your husband's future in jeopardy. Can you provide any evidence to the contrary?" Rebecca stood, her body shaking but her resolve steady. She had to do this. She had to play the game they'd force her into, but on her terms. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but unwavering, "the petition filed against me is based on lies. My financial history, The so-called reckless behavior, none of it is true. I've worked hard to build something. Something my family has never understood. Something they're about to learn about. She felt Adam's gaze burn into her, but she didn't flinch. The truth would come out. He couldn't control her anymore. Rebecca turned to the judge, holding up a small manila folder. "This," she said, her voice growing stronger, "is a letter from Whitmore Sterling and Associates, along with preliminary documents showing my inheritance. I ask that you review these before we proceed with this bankruptcy petition." The room fell silent. Adam's face went pale, his calculated composure cracking for the first time. The judge scanned the documents, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. "Your Honor," Rebecca continued, "what my family doesn't know is that I inherited Ashford Mining. It's mine. I'm the controlling shareholder of a company worth $60 billion. It was left to me by my grandfather, Theodore Ashford." The judge's face changed. The recognition in his eyes wasn't just surprise. It was understanding. He knew the implications of what Rebecca was saying. Adam stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his composure finally crumbling. "You can't just—" "Sit down, Mr. Matthews," the judge interjected, his voice calm but commanding. "You'll have your chance to speak. But for now, let Mrs. Matthews explain." Rebecca could feel the shift in the room. Her family was in shock. Adam's lawyer was already scrambling, trying to regain control. But Rebecca knew that the moment had arrived. The truth was out. She looked at her family, their faces filled with disbelief. Her parents, who had always seen her as a less successful child, were now forced to confront the reality of their mistakes. Her brother's expression was unreadable, but Rebecca could see the fear in his eyes. And Adam, well, Adam was already thinking of ways to twist this to his advantage, but was too late. The battle had just begun. Rebecca Matthews wasn't just fighting for her inheritance. She was fighting for her dignity, for her future. And now that the truth was out, there was no turning back. The courtroom was still, the air thick with the weight of Rebecca's revelation. Outside, the city of New York buzzed in the usual rush of midday traffic. But inside the cold, polished room, time seemed to stand still. The documents she presented, though momentous, were only the beginning of a battle that would change her life forever. Rebecca could feel Adam's eyes on her, seething with rage. He hadn't expected this. No one had. But she'd done what she had to do, what she'd been planning for weeks. She'd fought for her freedom, and now, for the first time in years, she felt the thrill of power, her power, coursing through her veins. Her lawyer, Daniel Reed, leaned toward her, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "This is only the first step. They'll fight it, of course, but you put them on the defensive. That's good." Rebecca nodded, her heart still pounding in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think the battle was over. Adam had always been the master manipulator, always several steps ahead. But today, for the first time, he didn't have control. The judge had adjourned the hearing, stating that further review of the evidence was necessary. That meant Rebecca had time to gather her documents, time to organize her strategy, time to fully claim what was rightfully hers. The gold mining empire, the $60 billion, her future. Rebecca stepped out of the courtroom into the bright hallway, the cold marble floors beneath her feet echoing with each step. Adam followed closely behind, his footsteps heavy with the weight of anger. His suit, once impeccable, now seemed too tight around his shoulders, as though the reality of the situation was physically constraining him. "You've made a mistake, Rebecca." Adam's voice was low, a barely contained growl. "You think this," he gestured toward the hallway, toward the papers in her hand, "changes anything? You don't know what you're dealing with." Rebecca turned to face him. taking a steadying breath. "No, Adam, you're the one who doesn't understand. You've never taken me seriously. You've always seen me as weak. But not anymore." The disdain in Adam's eyes was unmistakable. "You're playing a dangerous game. You think this inheritance will make you untouchable? You think this," he paused, his face twisting in contempt, "this gold mining empire, whatever you think you've inherited, is going to protect you from me?" Rebecca took a step closer, her voice calm, but with a steel edge. "You were never my protector, Adam. You've always been my prison." She let her words sink in before continuing. "I've known about the affair for months. I know about the accounts you've hidden, the lies you've built your empire on. And now, you'll have to watch as I build mine." Adam's eyes flickered for a moment, a flash of uncertainty breaking through the facade. But it was brief. He quickly recovered, his expression hardening once more. "You think you can control everything now, don't you? You think you'll just take the empire from me? You have no idea what you're up against." "I don't need to know everything," Rebecca said, her voice quiet but firm. "I just need to know that I can fight back. And I will." Rebecca turned to leave, but Adam stepped in her way. "You'll regret this. If you push me, I'll ruin you. I'll make sure this inheritance is nothing but dust in your hands." Her pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. She had been underestimated for years, and Adam's threats, though chilling, didn't scare her anymore. What he didn't realize was that the battle for Ashford mining wasn't just about money. It was about control, legacy, and revenge. Her mind flashed back to a moment, years ago, when she had been a young woman, fresh out of college, eager to prove herself. Back then, she had never imagined that the legacy she was about to inherit would come with so much weight. Her grandfather, Theodore Ashford, had kept the secret of the mining empire for years, but now it was hers. She was his chosen heir, not Adam, not anyone else. The gold mines, the boardrooms, the power, it all belonged to her now. As she exited the courthouse, the city of New York sprawled before her, an overwhelming, pulsing machine of opportunity. But as she stepped into the bright afternoon sun, Rebecca couldn't help but think about the costs. She had fought for this life for so long, but the inheritance was just the beginning. She had a long road ahead of her, a road that would lead her into dangerous territories where power, betrayal, and greed collided. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, not even her family. Not anymore. Flashback. The scene shifted to a moment in Rebecca's past, a time when she and her brother, Evan, were just children. The two of them had spent summers at their grandfather's estate, where he had taught them about the value of hard work, integrity, and the legacy they would one day inherit. Rebecca had been so young back then, naive to the truth of their family's wealth. Her grandfather had pulled her aside one afternoon, his voice gravelly from age and experience. "Rebecca," he had said, his hand resting on her shoulder, "this family is built on blood, sweat, and gold. You'll have to be smarter than your father, your brother, and everyone else. They'll try to take everything from you. Don't let them. This empire is yours to protect." Rebecca had only understood part of his words at the time. But now, as she stood on the precipice of that empire, the full weight of his advice bore down on her. The flashback faded as Rebecca walked through the busy streets, the sounds of the city blending with the echoes of her grandfather's voice. Her journey had only just begun, and Rebecca Matthews was ready to fight. The sun had long set, and New York's skyline now shimmered against the backdrop of a darkened sky, its towering buildings glowing with the last light of day. Rebecca sat in her office, her fingers drumming lightly on the polished oak desk in front of her. The papers were spread out in front of her, a mixture of legal documents, financial records, and letters she had yet to fully understand. Ashford Mining's future and her own was spread out like a puzzle she was only beginning to piece together. The revelation about her inheritance had shaken her to the core, but it was just the first domino to fall. Adam's threats had been chilling, and her family's quiet indifference stung more than she cared to admit. But what hurt the most was the realization that the empire she had inherited wasn't just a legacy. It was a battlefield. Rebecca hadn't expected it to be easy, but she hadn't anticipated the depth of the opposition she was about to face. She'd spent the evening reviewing the company's legal documents, and the more she read, the more the reality of her situation became clear. The company was in debt, deeply in debt, with numerous competitors breathing down its neck. The gold mining empire she'd inherited wasn't just valuable, it was vulnerable, and Adam, her own husband, had known that for years. He had played his hand too well, masking his true intentions under the guise of concern. He'd always wanted control, but now that she had the reins, he was desperate to take it back. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called out, her voice steady, though her mind was a whirlwind. Daniel Reed, her lawyer and now trusted confidant, stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He was carrying a thick folder, more legal documents, no doubt. "Rebecca," Daniel said, taking a seat across from her. His face was tense and his brow furrowed. "I've gone through everything. This is bigger than I thought. Your inheritance, what you're about to face, isn't just about getting control of the company. There are corporate raiders circling, investors trying to strip the assets, and a lot of people within the board who will do anything to see you fail." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her fingers still resting on the papers. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "What I'm saying is that this isn't just a legal battle. This is a fight for survival. You've inherited the company, yes, but you've also inherited its enemies, and they won't stop until they've either taken control of it or destroyed it." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't flinch. "I didn't ask for this. I never wanted this fight. But if they want to make it personal, then they've made a mistake." Daniel hesitated, clearly weighing his words. "Rebecca, you've inherited a lot of things, but you also have one more thing to think about. The people you trust, the people closest to you, they may not be as loyal as you think." Rebecca felt her heart skip a beat. She knew Daniel was right, but the idea of betrayal, especially from those closest to her, was almost too much to bear. "You're talking about Adam, aren't you?" Daniel nodded, his eyes meeting hers with seriousness that made her stomach tighten. "I've seen this before, Rebecca. Adam's ambitions go far beyond what he's shown you. You're not just fighting for control of the company. You're fighting to hold on to everything. Your legacy, your family, your own identity. And Adam, he's already planning his next move." Rebecca didn't need to ask what that next move was. She already knew. Adam had always been calculating, always playing both sides to secure his position. He wasn't just trying to bankrupt her. He was trying to take everything she had. Her thoughts turned back to the first few months of their marriage. Adam had been charming then, sweeping her off her feet with his ambition and his dreams. He had convinced her that together they could build an empire. But somewhere along the way, his ambitions had turned darker, more self-serving. She had loved him once, truly, but now she was starting to wonder if she had ever really known him. "We need to act fast," Rebecca said, her voice firm. "I'll start by taking full control of the board meetings. We'll tighten our grip on the company's assets. No more secrets, no more deals behind closed doors. I'm taking this to the next level." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You realize what that means, don't you?" Rebecca stood, walking to the window, her reflection staring back at her. The lights of New York flickered beneath her, each one a reminder of what was at stake. "I do. I have no choice." Flashback. The scene shifted, the present moment blurring into a memory from Rebecca's past. She was in her late 20s then, sitting at a cafe with her older brother Evan. They had both been freshly graduated, full of ambition, but still unsure of how to make their mark on the world. Evan had always been the more outgoing of the two, with big ideas and even bigger dreams. "Don't settle for the easy way out, Beck," Evan had told her, his voice full of conviction as he leaned across the table. "You've got the brains and the drive. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't let anyone tell you you're just someone's wife, someone's daughter. You have a legacy here, and it's yours to take." Rebecca had laughed, dismissing his words with a shrug. "You sound like Grandpa." "Maybe I do," Evan had said with a smile, "but he was right. You're destined for something bigger than this." She had never fully understood what Evan meant back then, but now, as she stood at the edge of her inheritance, she could feel the weight of his words in her bones. Her grandfather had seen something in her that even she hadn't fully understood until now. The gold mines, the empire, the responsibility. Rebecca's grip on the window sill tightened. She wasn't just fighting for a company. She was fighting for her identity, for the legacy her grandfather had entrusted to her. As the days passed, Rebecca threw herself into the work, navigating the murky waters of corporate politics and power struggles. She spent hours in meetings, digging through every legal document, making phone calls to investors and meeting with the board. But as the pressure mounted, so did the isolation. The world of Ashford mining was vast, and the stakes were higher than anything she had ever imagined. But it wasn't just the company that was at risk. It was her future. The more she uncovered, the more she realized just how deep the betrayal ran. Adam, her family, even some of her closest allies, they all had their hands in the pot, each with their own agenda. Rebecca had always believed she could trust her husband, but now the truth was clear. Adam's betrayal wasn't just about business. It was personal, and it was about time she took matters into her own hands. The walls of Rebecca's office seemed to close in on her as the weight of the decisions she had to make grew heavier. The phone calls, the meetings, the emails, it all became a blur of activity. The world outside her window, the bustling streets of New York, felt like another life, a world where people lived without the constant pressure of family betrayal and corporate warfare. But for Rebecca, there was no escape from the reality she had inherited. Adam's threats had only escalated in the days since their last confrontation. He had been cold, calculating, always a step ahead, trying to control the narrative, trying to manipulate the board, her family. But Rebecca wasn't the same woman she had been just a few weeks ago. The shock of the inheritance was fading, replaced by a steady resolve to take back what was hers and to prove that she was more than just a wife, more than just a daughter. She was the heir of Ashford Mining, and no one would strip that from her. But the fight was far from easy. That morning, Daniel had delivered the news that Rebecca had been dreading. "I'm sorry to tell you this, Rebecca, but the board is questioning your leadership," Daniel said, his voice tense over the phone. "Several of the major stakeholders are pushing to have you removed from your position. They're questioning your ability to run the company, given your inexperience and the allegations against you." Rebecca's stomach tightened, but she didn't let the panic show. "I built everything on my own. They'll see that when they stop listening to Adam's lies." "That's the thing," Daniel continued. "They're not just listening to Adam. They're listening to your family. Your parents are backing him. Your brother, well, let's just say he's not on your side either. They all want to take control. They see your rise as a threat. Rebecca, they don't want you in charge." Rebecca's grip tightened on the phone. This was it. This was the test. Her family, the people she had trusted most in the world, were turning their backs on her. It wasn't just about Adam anymore. It was about her legacy, her family's betrayal, and her ability to prove herself. "I'll handle it," Rebecca said, her voice cold, steady. "I have a plan." Flashback. The scene shifted back to Rebecca's childhood, to a time when her family was still whole. She was 10 years old, sitting at the dinner table with her parents and Evan. The conversation was lighthearted, full of laughter and stories about the day's events. But then her father, always the sharp one, the businessman, had looked at her with a gaze that felt far too intense for a young girl to comprehend. "Rebecca," her father had said, his voice warm but with a hidden sharpness, "your grandfather is leaving something behind for you, something you'll have to take care of when the time comes." She had nodded, not fully understanding the gravity of his words, but trusting in his assurance. "What is it, Dad?" Her father had smiled then, but there was a weight behind his eyes. "When the time comes, you'll understand, and you'll be ready. You're meant for this, Rebecca." But as time passed, those words, once so comforting, had turned into a haunting prophecy. Her father's expectations had always been high, but the reality of what she was facing now, losing everything she'd worked for, was something she hadn't been prepared for. She had spent years trying to gain their approval, trying to prove herself in a world that saw her as nothing more than an extension of Adam's success. And now, everything was slipping through her fingers. Back in the present, Rebecca's office had become her battlefield. She was standing at her desk, staring at the piles of documents in front of her, when the door opened. Daniel entered, a serious expression on his face. "Rebecca, we've got a situation," he said, holding a thick envelope in his hand. "The board's been briefed. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. They'll vote on whether to strip you control and put someone else in charge, likely Adam." Her heart skipped a beat. Adam was moving faster than she had anticipated, but this wasn't the time to fold. She had come too far to let him win. Rebecca straightened her back, her eyes hardening. "We're not going to let that happen." "We don't have much time," Daniel said. "You need to get ahead of this. You need to make your move before they do." Rebecca nodded, her mind racing. There was no more room for hesitation. She had to act now, and she had to act decisively. The stakes were too high. "Get me the numbers," she said, her voice sharp. "I need a full report on every major investor, every stakeholder, and I want to know everything about the people who are supporting Adam." Daniel paused. "Are you sure about this? You're going to challenge them head on." Rebecca's eyes met his, and for the first time since she had inherited the company, she felt a surge of power, the kind that came from knowing her worth. "I didn't inherit this empire to hand it over," she said, "and I'm not going to let them take it from me. This is my fight now." The night before the meeting, Rebecca sat alone in her office, reviewing her plan. It was risky, but it was the only place she had left. She would need to secure the support of key board members, make them see her as more than just a vulnerable wife. She would leverage her inheritance, not as a safety net, but as the weapon it truly was. The following morning, as Rebecca walked into the boardroom, she knew this was a moment that would define everything. Adam was already there, sitting at the head of the table, his face a mask of confidence. But underneath that mask, Rebecca could see the cracks. He was nervous, and that made her more certain than ever that she was doing the right thing. The door shut behind her, and she stood tall, her posture exuding the power she had reclaimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, cutting through the room, "I've inherited more than just the title of CEO. I inherited this company. And now, it's time for me to show you what I'm capable of." Adam's jaw tightened as Rebecca placed the full report on the table, the weight of the company's future now resting in her hands. The days following the board meeting felt like a blur, each one more tense than the last. Rebecca had secured a temporary victory. The board had voted to keep her in control, but the battle wasn't over. Adam's influence ran deep. He had allies in places Rebecca couldn't yet reach. But that didn't matter. The momentum had shifted, and now Rebecca had a plan, one that would tip the scales in her favor. But it wasn't without its risks. Rebecca sat in the conference room of Ashford Mining's headquarters, the city skyline looming behind her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was alone, her thoughts consumed by the next steps. The weight of the empire she now controlled settled on her shoulders like a burden she never fully understood until this moment. But this was the life she had inherited, and if she was going to protect it, she would need to think bigger than ever before. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Daniel. "Rebecca, we need to talk. The shareholders' meeting is tomorrow. Adam's planning something big. We don't have much time." Rebecca's pulse quickened. Tomorrow, the day when everything would change. She had no idea what Adam had planned, but she was done being reactive. She was done hiding behind her inheritance. It was time to take control. She dialed Daniel's number, her hand steady despite the mounting pressure. When he answered, his voice was filled with urgency. "Rebecca, listen to me. There's a huge push from the board to get you out. Adam has convinced enough shareholders that you're a liability. They're ready to vote you out tomorrow if you don't have a solid countermeasure." "I'm aware," Rebecca replied, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not going to back down. We'll meet tomorrow morning, and I'll handle it." Daniel hesitated. "Rebecca, you don't understand. This isn't just about the company anymore. Adam's digging into your personal life. He's spreading rumors about your past, about your marriage. He's trying to destroy your reputation. If you don't fight back now, it could be too late." Rebecca's grip on the phone tightened. She'd known Adam was ruthless, but this was a new level of betrayal. "I've fought my whole life for this," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm not going to let him take it from me. I'll see him tomorrow at that meeting." Flashback. A younger Rebecca stood in her family's kitchen, her mother's voice echoing in her ears. "You're too soft, Rebecca. You let people walk all over you. This family doesn't need another weak link." Her mother had always been sharp, critical. Rebecca had spent her childhood trying to live up to her mother's impossible standards, but nothing she did was ever good enough. Her mother had always seen her as a disappointment. Too quiet, too hesitant. Not enough like her brother, Evan, who had followed in their father's footsteps and taken over the family business. That night, Rebecca had taken a long walk by herself, down the same street she had walked for years. She had tried to push her emotions down, to ignore the hurt, but it always came back. The expectation, the weight of being a Matthews. A legacy she had never asked for, but one she couldn't escape. She had stopped in front of a small bookstore, a place she often went to when she needed to think. Inside, she had found an old book on corporate leadership, one that would change the course of her life. The book spoke of strength, but it spoke of a different kind of strength, a strength that didn't require playing dirty or compromising morals. The strength of quiet resolve, of persistence, of knowing when to speak up and when to step back. That night, Rebecca had made a vow to herself. She would prove her worth, not to her family, not to Adam, but to herself. Rebecca snapped back to the present, her mind clear, her decision made. She wasn't just inheriting a company. She was inheriting a battle. The morning of the shareholders' meeting arrived quickly. The boardroom was full when she entered, the tension palpable. Adam was already there, seated at the head of the table, a smirk on his face as he watched her enter. Rebecca stepped forward, her posture strong, her eyes focused. She felt the weight of the moment, but there was no turning back now. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm but carrying authority, "I'm here to address the future of Ashford Mining. You've all heard the rumors. You've all heard the stories Adam has been feeding you. But I'm here to tell you the truth." The room fell silent. She could see the skepticism in the eyes of some of the board members, but she wasn't here to win them all over. She was here to make sure they knew who was in charge. Adam's plan to push me out is based on lies. I've inherited this company, and I am fully capable of running it. But that's not the issue here, is it? The real issue is control, power. And Adam is the one who's been playing games with your trust, using his charm to manipulate you. Rebecca turned to Adam, her gaze unflinching. You've lied to all of us, Adam. You've been working behind the scenes, pulling strings and spreading rumors. But I'm not the weak woman you think I am. And I'm not the woman who's going to let you destroy this company for your own gain. Adam's face flushed with rage. But Rebecca stood her ground. She could feel the room shifting. The whispers started, the tide of opinion beginning to turn. I have a plan, she continued, her voice firm. And I'm going to ensure that this company's legacy is protected. No more secrets. No more manipulation. It's time for Ashford Mining to move forward, under my leadership. Rebecca laid out her plan, a detailed blueprint for the company's future, one that would not only secure its financial stability, but also restore its integrity. She spoke with passion, with conviction, and with the knowledge that this was the moment she had been working toward. Adam tried to interrupt, but the room had already shifted. The board members, many of whom had been swayed by Adam's lies, were now seeing the truth. The vote was called, and when the results were announced, Rebecca had secured the majority. The room erupted into murmurs, but Rebecca knew this was her victory. She had reclaimed her place at the head of Ashford Mining, and Adam, he was now the one fighting to regain control. The weeks following the shareholders' meeting had been a whirlwind. The board, once fractured under Adam's manipulation, was now united behind Rebecca. The company was hers, but the war was far from over. She had claimed her place at the top, but the battles within her family and the business world raged on, each one more intense than the last. Rebecca stood in the center of her office. The view of Manhattan spread out before her like a vast ocean of possibility. The towering skyscrapers, the bustling streets far below. It all felt so distant from where she had been just a few months ago. She was no longer the woman hidden behind Adam's shadow. She was a force, a leader of Ashford Mining, and the empire she had inherited was about to become her legacy. The phone rang on her desk, cutting through the silence of the room. It was Daniel. "Rebecca, you need to be prepared," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Adam's not done. He's going after everything now. The company, your reputation, your legacy. He's not just threatening you anymore. He's playing dirty." Rebecca's hand tightened around the phone, her mind racing. "What do you mean, dirty?" "He's taking this public," Daniel replied. "He's talking to press, digging into your personal life. He's trying to turn the public against you, painting you as incompetent, as someone who inherited their way into success. He's positioning himself as the only one who can save the company." Rebecca's jaw clenched, the anger bubbling up from within. It wasn't enough that Adam had tried to destroy her career, her family, her marriage. Now, he was attacking her very identity, trying to tear down everything she had built. "I'll deal with the press," she said, her voice calm, though a storm was brewing inside her. "And I'll deal with Adam. It's time he learned that I'm not the one he can push around anymore." Flashback. Rebecca was 15 years old, sitting on the steps of her family's estate in the quiet suburbs of upstate New York. Her father, always so distant, had come outside to find her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his suit. "You're wasting your time," he had said, his voice clipped. "You need to focus on the future. Forget about this childish nonsense." Rebecca had looked up at him, her heart heavy with unspoken words. "I don't want to be like you, Dad. I don't want to build an empire of lies. I don't want to be a part of all this." Her father had looked at her for a long moment, his eyes hard, but there was something else there, a hint of regret. "You don't understand. This isn't about you, Rebecca. It's about protecting everything we built. You'll learn that soon enough. But Rebecca hadn't wanted to learn his lessons. She hadn't wanted to be like him, the man who had built his life on the backs of others, the man who had pushed his daughter to the sidelines, who had treated her like a pawn in a game she didn't even understand. And now, as she stood at the pinnacle of her own empire, she understood what her father had meant. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about money. It was about legacy. The choices she made now would echo through history. The flashback faded, and Rebecca's focus returned to the present. The battle was no longer just about saving Ashford Mining. It was about proving that she could stand on her own, that she could build her future without the influence of Adam, her family, or anyone else. She was going to redefine her legacy on her terms. Adam's press campaign was in full swing, the tabloids and news outlets painting her as a woman who had inherited her success, a woman incapable of leading an empire. But Rebecca wasn't about to let him win. She knew the truth, and now it was time to show the world. She sat at her desk and began drafting a statement for the press. It needed to be perfect, something that would both expose Adam's lies and reclaim her power. She had nothing to prove to anyone but herself, but the world needed to know the truth. The phone rang again. This time it was Evan. "Rebecca, I need to talk to you." Evan's voice was low, almost apologetic. "I know things have been tense, but this is bigger than you and Adam. I'm not blind to what's going on." Rebecca didn't want to hear his excuses. She didn't want to hear about how he had stood by as Adam had torn apart her life, as he had supported Adam's every move. But Evan had always been her brother, the one person who had never really understood her. "I don't need your help, Evan," Rebecca said, her voice firm. "I don't need anyone's help. I've fought for this on my own, and I'll keep fighting." "No," Evan replied, a tone of frustration in his voice. "You don't understand. You're playing into Adam's hands. He's going to use this to destroy you. He's already turning the board against you, getting the press to do his bidding. You need to act fast, or you'll lose everything." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her mind running through the possibilities. Adam had always been one step ahead, but this time she had the advantage. She had the truth, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. "I'm done being manipulated," she said coldly. "If Adam thinks he can break me, he's wrong. I'm going to destroy him." Flashback. The final flashback took her back to a moment with Adam, right before their marriage had begun to unravel. They were sitting in the living room of their Manhattan apartment, the city lights glowing softly through the windows. Adam had been talking about their future, about the plans he had for Ashford Mining, about how they were going to build something together. "You've always been so independent, Rebecca," he had said, his voice tender. "But now we're partners. You need to trust me. I'll take care of everything. I just need you to be there." At the time, she had believed him. She had believed in his promises, in his charm. But now, as she sat in her office, she could see it for what it was: manipulation. Adam had always wanted control, and he had taken it from her piece by piece. But that was over now. Rebecca stood up from her desk, her fingers brushing the papers in front of her. It was time to go on the offensive. She wasn't going to play by Adam's rules anymore. She wasn't going to let him dictate her future or her family's future. She was going to take back everything he had stolen. The phone buzzed again. It was a text from Daniel. "It's time. The press conference is in an hour. We're ready." Rebecca took a deep breath, her hand steady as she typed a reply. "Let's do this."